Cutters, Degrassi, Unpopular Opinions. Hey there, Heather, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to another Cutter, Degrassi, Unpopular Opinion. And this one's number 190, so this is a big one. Now, normally, I have actually done a few unpopular opinions on doubling down. And of course, I will link to the playlist in the description if you haven't seen it. But the simple fact is, there's been many times I've actually done multiple unpopular opinions on the same topic, such as Emma's friendship, not really Emma's friendship with many, but Emma's problems, especially in season 6 with the whole Lakehurst situation. I've done multiples. I've done multiples about Rick Murray and why he wasn't charged with anything and what could have led to it and why he was back at Degrassi in the first place. I've done multiples about Raditch, doubling down on why Raditch shouldn't be such a big villain. I've done a lot of time stand still. I've doubled down on the whole unpopular opinions about the deleted scenes and all that. But I've actually been surprised I haven't doubled down on this one. So as I look at my Degrassi unpopular opinions list, one video comes to mind. And forgive my internet, sometimes it's slow to the touch for some reason too. But anyway, yeah, it's an older PC, so that's kind of why. Yeah, I got thinking about a lot of Degrassi stuff and all that. So one of my earlier Degrassi unpopular opinions was about Rick's problems with people and all that. Oh, here we go. CDUO number 46. So if you go to the playlist and look at number 46, I did a unpopular opinion called Paige was a main reason for Rick's temper, which was a very long one. So yeah, so number 46 was the one. So this is the first time I've been looking at it for, gosh knows, for a couple of years. So years ago, I made the statement that Rick's anger was kind of Paige's fault in a sense. I know it's unpopular and all that. Now, of course, this, unlike many unpopular opinions / Degrassiisms I did not do I'm not doing a Reddit post in preparation for it. Normally I would take preparation and all that, but because I'm so gung-ho on doubling down on the whole Paige and Rick dynamic, that, I'm not going to listen to the Reddit community this time, but I should. Anyhow, so here's the context of the whole Paige and Rick thing. So as we all know, Rick in season 3 was a secret admirer of Terry. And then all he did was basically emotionally and a couple times physically abused her. Now, people forget that the first time he physically abused her, he shoved her against a wall, which led to them breaking up. And then after the trust exercise in Where I Lay My Head, or whatever that episode was called, they get back together, and Terry's happy to have Rick come on the road trip with the couples of Hazel and Jimmy and Paige and Spinner. All that. And of course, Spinner and Jimmy said, we got to watch out for Terry. So the fact of the matter is that Paige sets Rick off, rightfully so in a sense. And then Rick walks away and Terry runs after Rick. And then, Rick has the argument and accidentally shoves Terry's head against a rock. And there's blood on his hands and all that. Thankfully, Paige and Spinner find Terry before it's too late. Got her to the hospital. Got through surgery and all that. And Paige and Spinner had a tough time explaining to Terry's dad about Rick and all that. Mr. McGregor does snap at Paige and Spinner, saying that you should have told me about Rick's bad behavior and all that. Why that's happening? And, Paige and Spinner were angry at each other. But the simple fact was that, he did apologize sooner than later. But then, Rick is gone and we're thinking, well, he's gone. Thank goodness for that. But we lost Terry in a sense. Season 4 happens. No Terry. Is like, okay, fine. First few episodes, fine. Paige's rape trial one. And then about Marco running for student council, fine. And then comes Mercy Street. And there's Rick coming back to the school. And Paige and Spinner and the clique are upset by it. Rick coming back. Similarly with no repercussions whatsoever. Rick does say he's going into therapy. But that's hard to believe. Paige is upset that Rick's back at the school. No one's willing to do anything about it. The administration is of no help and all that. Emma takes it upon herself to try to get into Paige's clique and help Paige with the problem with Rick with the Orange Ribbon campaign, which goes well. It hurts Rick in a sense, but Rick's not leaving Degrassi anytime soon. And, Emma ruins that campaign by protecting Rick from a beating from Alex. I mean, Emma did the right thing in a sense. It just wasn't in the right context. But then, Emma gets shunned and all that. And then, there's still the anti Rick campaign. Time stands still, it still happens. And then, Rick gets put in a dumpster by Jimmy and Spinner, and then he spray paints the cars of his tormentors. Alex, without much proof, says that it was Rick. Of course, they have to get Rick back without getting under Radish's skin because, Radish is going to wonder about things. So, anywho, they do the Paint and Feathers campaign. They're upset that Jimmy switched sides and all that. Rick comes back to the school with his Paint and Feathers outfit on, with a gun in his backpack, and basically decides to go after Paige. A lot of people said that Rick should have gone after Emma first. But no, he went after Paige. He's the one who wanted revenge on Paige because Paige spread the anti-Rick rhetoric. And then Paige talks to Rick, and then as Rick slowly raises the gun, but no one sees it, Paige says everything was childish, and then she was sincere, and Rick decides to drop the gun back in his backpack and says, "I'm sorry for what I did to Terry." Generally apologizing for the first time. And it's like, where the hell was this? Maybe things would have been better for Rick. But then, Rick puts the gun back in his locker and cleans himself up, but then Spinner and Jay trick him into thinking Jimmy did it. Rick shoots Jimmy in the back with the gun. And of course, it gets the spine. Thankfully, Jimmy's alive, but he's in a wheelchair. Now, someone actually said in the past few weeks that there was some foreshadowing and all that. And then there was an episode in which there was a car wash thing, and Rick took his mom's car to get it cleaned, but then Jimmy says, "We don't want you," and then sprays Rick seemingly in the back with the hose and all that. And it's like, that's creepy foreshadowing I didn't even see. I didn't even think about that. I didn't really watch that episode because, it didn't really feature Rick in any shape or form. Well, how do I was wrong. So the simple fact, guys, was that, he did that, and then he wanted to shoot Emma for spurning him because he kissed her. But Sean saves the day by getting Rick's gun and then accidentally shooting him in the stomach. It was pure accident, pretty much. So then, Rick dies, and then Paige feels guilty and all that. Now, I'm not saying that, Paige was the biggest villain to do with Rick's problems because, Rick snapping was a combination of a lot of things. And maybe Rick's dad was probably the main reason why Rick was who he was. I mean, but you got to look at it this way: is how Paige and Rick intertwined themselves, if you will. Here's the reasoning between everything, and of course that CDUO I did a long time ago. There's a lot of things. Rick was upset when Paige basically called him a psycho and all that. So he runs off, and then Terry runs off after him in Everywhere I Lay My Head, or whatever that episode's called. I have bad knowledge of episode titles sometimes. But Anytime I Lay My Head, I think it was. But anyhow, he ran off from Paige's comment. And Terry tells Rick that, it's just Paige being Paige. And that makes it okay. I mean, Rick's upset that, Terry is under Paige's wing and all that. Basically, Terry is scared to go against Paige and her clique and all that, and being a psycho and all that. But the simple fact is that Rick has a point. Like, Rick is correct that he feels he has a right to feel that Terry is under Paige's shadow and refuses to remove herself from underneath Paige's shadow. I mean, after all, the freaking guy, after all, Paige in season 2 told Terry and Hazel, it's either you're friends with me and you be part of the cool crowd, or you're friends with Ashley and become outcasts. And Paige and Hazel choose the former, leaving Ashley to turn goth, probably just to tell people, this is your fault for making me goth, and Paige and all that. And Paige is the source of why Ashley turned off and all that. I think she was just trying to destroy Paige in a sense. Paige can be a handful sometimes. But the fact of the matter is that even before the incident, the rock incident, can't remember the episode. King of Pain? No, that can't be it. But in season 3, that Rick is upset that Terry is maybe having eyes for Jimmy. Like Rick sabotages Terry's acting thing because he's scared that Terry might be going after Jimmy, not him. And then Rick tells Terry to stay away from Paige and Hazel outside of school and all that because they're spreading rhetoric about me and all that. And then Terry says, "Don't worry about Paige." And then Rick is upset and says, "You're not going back there, not." And then head smashes into the rock, and I'm like, "Oh God, no! Dear God, no!" But that's just the way it is. The fact of the matter is that Rick was angry. Paige, in his mind, Paige was just pushing Terry around, and I can understand that. He's a protective boyfriend, but there's a right way and a wrong way to be a protective boyfriend, and that was the wrong way, what he did in season 3. Paige was concerned about Terry's well-being and all that. Fair enough. But Rick thought that Terry was just pushed under Paige's shadow and refuses to go under, leave herself from Paige. And then, Rick comes back in season 4, and Paige is disgusted. Of course, Paige has the right to be disgusted about the situation. I mean, after all, she was the one who, alongside Spinner, found a hurt Terry thanks to that rock and thanks to Rick having blood in his hands. And of course, it puzzles me. It's like, why didn't Paige and Spinner go to the cops with this information? I mean, Rick might not have gotten a criminal charge against him, but he would have been investigated. And being investigated is as big as a criminal charge in most cases. But then again, maybe Rick would have got out of it shedding crocodile tears and all that shit. But might I digress? The simple fact is that, Paige wants Rick to leave Degrassi. Lots of people do. Like, I don't blame her for that. That's fair assessment. But Rick says, "I'm going to win you back." Not by being a jerk and all that. Being apologetic could be the first step in everything. But the fact of the matter is that, Rick was just at news. So the simple fact is that Rick sees the Orange Ribbon campaigns. He sees that Paige is the main antagonist for the whole situation to get him out of Degrassi. I mean, he kind of does in his head figure that, yeah, it has to be Paige because, of what happened the previous year. And so he should. But the fact is, Rick, when he approaches Emma with that check for $550 or something similar to that, I don't know the full amount, but basically put, he says, every little bit helps with domestic violence. And then Emma's like, okay, fine. And then Alex rips up the check and rips Emma a new one for trying to buy forgiveness. Although Emma was just doing it for the cause. Unfortunately, Emma didn't see the underbelly of how her cause was going to be taken. And, I think that was probably why Emma tried to stop being the cause girl, because she didn't want the situation to happen to her. But I mean, how would Emma have foreshadowed the fact that Rick was going to go after her with a gun for spreading his advances in Time Stands Still Part 1? We never know that. But the simple fact is that it's just creepy and wrong. And Rick, in his mind, figured Paige was up to this because Paige started this whole campaign to get him out. And Rick thinks that he's being vilified because of one simple accident to Terry. And, he doesn't know what happened to Terry. Well, Terry goes to a private school, but that's what we know as the viewer in a deleted scene of all things. But simply put, he figures that Paige is just bad news. And now he's got the inkling that Paige is forcing Emma to do her dirty business. Maybe in that whole thing in Mercy Street, Rick's thinking that, Emma's a beautiful girl, but why is Emma under Paige's shadow? He's thinking to himself, Emma's being pushed by Paige to push Rick out. Maybe he thinks that Emma's an unwilling participant in this whole situation. I doubt it, but Rick has a weird way of thinking sometimes, and that is actually true. Regardless of that, you know, he's just hoping that, Paige will let off the gas on trying to destroy him and all that. No, pretty boy, no. So, of course, Rick is still being tormented and all that. And, Paige was kind of a tormentor to him. That's why he figured something was wrong. But then, Time Stands Still Part 1 is all that. Paige doesn't really get Rick any trouble and all that. Except for that line, Raj called. He wants his suit. Back with Rick's suit. Tell him to take a message. So then Time Stands Still Part 2 happens, and Rick goes into the cafeteria. No one stops him. Nobody stops him. And then he's ready to hurt Paige and all that. Talk to Paige and hurt her. He slowly raises the handgun from his backpack. Unbeknownst to Paige, and no one else sees the gun because they would have caused a commotion. But then Paige says, look, I know we're not the best of friends and I know things are bad, but what happened to you was childish. And then Rick figured that Paige could not have done it. So he basically says, I'm sorry for hurting Terry. And then just walks away out of the cafeteria. No one stops him. No one does everything. Rick puts the gun back in his locker. So now Paige has calmed him down in a sense. And that was great. Paige didn't see the gun. Paige didn't figure that Rick was going to shoot her. She just had an inkling and it worked. But of course, a lot of doubters will say, well, Rick, after Emma spurned him in Time Stands Still Part 1 with that kiss, Rick was covered in paint and feathers. Like, ew, yuck. And then Emma says, I pity you get a clue. That's why I protected you. And then, Rick is going to go after Emma. But riddle me this. If that was true, one thing, why did he go after Paige in the cafeteria? And number two, and something I just realized after rewatching it, there was that scene at the picnic table. Remember the scene in Time Stands Still Part 2, the second scene? Well, the first scene was Rick looking at his dad's handgun. And then the second scene talks about Toby saying that, are they going to show the paint and feathers on TV? And then Emma, I believe, says, they'll just edit it out. And then Danny and JT are laughing at it. And Toby says, what if that happens to you, JT? Would you laugh? And Danny says, I know I would. And speaking of things to laugh at, Danny says, and then Toby talks to Rick, but Rick says, this is one time I want to be at school, and walks towards the school. I mean, if he wanted to go after Emma, why didn't he go after Emma at the picnic table? But then again, it's debunked because there were 3 witnesses. Toby, JT, and Danny, aka Liberty's brother. But also riddle me this, is that in the case of that, how many witnesses were there when Rick pointed the gun at Emma? There was Sean and Toby were with Emma and were with Emma. Toby was there too. Toby was there when Rick pointed the gun at Emma and then got shot by Sean in the stomach. So it didn't really matter. That's the debunk thing is debunked because there were 2 other people with Emma as witnesses. If Rick wanted to get Emma with no witnesses, he didn't get it. And then, he went after Paige. He calmed down, and then Spinner and Jay push him to shoot Jimmy, which he does. And then conveniently, he finds Sean, Emma, and Toby walking together towards Rick, despite the fact that people were running. Students were running. And then that's when Rick wants to kill Emma for spurning his advances. And then Toby tries to talk to him. Sean does the right thing by talking to him, like a police officer is trying to calm down somebody. But Rick doesn't believe it and just wants to go after Emma. And then Sean shoots him. But the simple fact is that, Rick had a lot of anger towards people, especially Emma. But the start of his rage was towards Paige. And you know why? Because Paige was not too pleased with how Rick was handling Terry. Rick figured that Terry was just under Paige's shadow and, has to speak up against Paige. Terry refuses, and then he shoves her against the wall. And then he has the problems with Paige with the simple fact that, Terry tells Rick, Paige is being Paige. That's what she says and says. And he's like, is that okay with you? In his head, it's like Paige is trying to control Terry. And he gets raged because of that. He gets enraged with the fact of the whole Orange Ribbon campaign that Paige used it as a way to destroy Rick and all that, which was kind of in a way. But he also figured that Paige was pushing Emma, saying that, that he figures that Emma is being given false information by Paige. Of course, this is all in Rick's head and all that. We know Rick was delusional. But the simple fact was that, in his mind, Paige was putting the bug in Emma's ear about Rick and not telling her the whole story about the whole incident. And that's when Emma decides to try to do their own Man campaign. Tries to pay her off. He doesn't because Alex puts up the check. So no $500 for that. And Emma is like upset that this could help domestic violence victims. Alex says she was one herself. And Emma's like, this could help you and all that. That's right, she didn't come back with that remark. But the fact of the matter is that Rick went after Paige with the intent. If he wanted to go after Emma for spurning him, he would have had a chance at the picnic table. But then again, there were a few witnesses. But then, as I said, it's debunked because there were 2 witnesses to the whole thing with Rick pointing the gun at Emma. Like, it didn't matter in the long run. It didn't matter at all. But the fact of the matter is that Rick had a lot of anger towards Paige. It was justifiable because he figured that Terry was under Paige's weight. Paige was pushing Terry with false information and the promise that, you stay with me, you'll be popular, otherwise you're just a has-been. And he was upset with Paige, thinking that Emma was doing these things only because Paige gave false information. But then again, remember, it's from his POV. So the simple thing is, of all that, and then it's like, he went after Paige first. He could have gone after Emma first, but he didn't. He went after Paige first. Paige calmed him down, and he was calm about it. And Paige was not really the tormentor of Rick anymore. So that must have been a win for Rick. But now he's dead, and probably in hell where he fucking belongs. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Thanks for watching.